Hello, welcome to week 5 of Beginning Networking 1. For this week, we're going to be talking about TCP/IP addressing in Chapter 4. So the assignments are going to be to read Chapter 4, TCP/IP addressing, and then we're going to have the CompTIA labs, and this week will be configuring IPv4 networking. And as always, just put a screenshot and upload it for me. And the following videos are going to be assigned for watching, and then you're going to complete a practice test in the Total Tester software. And there's 90 questions, and I want you to do it in practice mode. That way, if you miss it, you can check your answers now instead of an hour later, and you can kind of see why you missed those. So the directions for getting the practice test are right there, and it'll pull this file up and it'll walk you through everything you need to do to get into the exam. And then once you've completed the practice test, just put it in the folder here for me and I'll grade it for you. And then here's for your lab. And then we're also going to do a Zoom meeting, a live Q&A. So we got a couple weeks into the class now, and you might have some questions about different topics or whatever. So that's going to be this Monday on 9/20 at 6 p.m. MST. And here's all the information on how to get into the Zoom meeting. And if you don't have Zoom, you may have to download that. But anyways, yeah, so you're not required to come to this. I am going to record it, and I'll post the recording as well. But there have to be some people in there to ask questions to make it worth recording. So anyways, I hope to see you there. And let's see here. So this week we talked about, we're going to be talking about Chapter 4 here. And we've got the TCP/IP addresses that we were talking about, subnet mask, network IDs, the different classes of TCP/IP, and different concepts for configuration. So I've got some of those things already pulled up here. And by the way, this is the Total Tester, what it looks like. This is where you'll be taking your practice exam. So let's see here. Yeah, so just log into that, and that's how you'll be doing that. And then, of course, here's your labs. And as you complete these, just upload your lab for me, print screen. I would like to get some feedback too about the labs on how those are going, if you like those, if they're helping or whatnot. Okay, so for IP address classes, subnet mask, we're just going to touch on a couple things here. So let's see here. Okay, so this is an IP address, 192.168.1.152. This is the first octet, second octet, third octet, and fourth octet. And these have a binary meaning. Excuse me. So you can translate those into binary, which is what ultimately happens when it goes into the computer. But for now, just realize that there's 4 octets, and they're all going to have their purpose. So we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So in your IP address, you're going to have a net ID and a host ID. And those are going to determine where your how your device can communicate. And so if we pull this up and take a little bit better look at that. So you have network and host ID concepts. So the network ID is going to be like 192.168.0 for Class C, and the host ID would be 2. So you can see how they've identified this host as number 2, this one as number 1, 3, 4, 6, and 5. So the above Class C network has a network ID of 192.168.0, and you can see the host ID varies for each host. So that's how they identify each individual machine so they can route the right traffic to it, basically. So think of this kind of as like a street address, and this number here is the actual house number, and that's how you get your mail. So kind of think of it that way a little bit. And okay, so let's go back one. Okay, so your subnet mask, it helps identify the network portion and the host portion in the IP address. So in other words, the subnet mask separates the ID and host ID in an IP address. So this is your IP address. So you have 192.168.1.34 for your IP address. And then for your subnet mask, you have 255.255.255.0. And let's see here. So okay, so if the ocklets of the IP address belong to the network portion, then the ocklets of the subnet mask are turned on, and the remaining belong to the host portion, which is turned off. So that's an important part there to remember. In example 1, the subnet mask of 255.0.0.0 is turned on, and the remaining is turned off. So in an IP address of 168.192.0.1, the first part represents the network ID of 255, and the remaining represent the host ID of 198.0.1. And then IP address classes. So there's different classes. You have an A, B, C, D, and E. And I've got a couple other things I could show you on this, but so here they show you like the network ID and then the host ID. So for Class A, you're going to have this part be the network ID. Class A host ID is going to be these parts, and then so forth. So you're going to have Class B and Class B. So your network ID, your host ID, your network ID, your host ID, and then D is a multicast. So that's a little bit different. That's where it's kind of sending out information to everybody. And then let's see here. So the loopback IP address is used by the operating system to create a virtual network interface where the computer communicates with itself. So this is used in testing a lot to make sure that you have a good connection. And then you have IPv4 versus IPv6. So they're showing here the loopback. So they're basically pinging their own machine, and you can see that it's replying. So the loopback is 127.0.0.1, and then with IPv6, they do a : 1, and you can see that it's replying back as well. And then here they're starting to break down like the different networks. So like Class A, you have 7 bits available for the network ID, and then 24 bits available for the host ID. So you could have 128 networks on this Class A with 16,777,216 hosts. So that's a lot of hosts. And then with the B, you have 21 available networks bits where you could have 2,097,152 networks, and you could have 256 hosts. And then with the Class C, you're going to have Oh, I'm sorry. So this was the class with Class C. You're going to have the 256 hosts, and then with Class A. So, and then Class B is going to have 65,000 hosts. So you can see the difference in those. And I've got some charts that are going to show that to us a little bit later. But before subnetting, you have the network identifier, then you have the host identifier. And then after subnetting, you have the network identifier, the subnet identifier, then the host identifier. So you can see the difference and you see how you can split up your networks using subnetting. So let's see here. So another thing that's talked about a lot in this chapter is the dynamic host configuration. So DHCP, DHCP stands for Dynamic Host Protocol Configuration Protocol, and it's client server protocol. Basically, what happens is when you turn a machine on a network, then the DHCP server will assign an IP address to that machine, and it's a really streamlined, good way of managing your IP addresses on a network. So the benefits are reliable IP address configuration, reduced network administration because the computer server system's doing it for you, centralized and automated TCP/IP configurations, the ability to define TCP/IP configurations from a central location. So there's a lot of benefits to using DHCP server. One of the other topics that was pretty heavy in this chapter was DNS. So DNS stands for Domain Name Server. And basically what happens is you type in www.caspercollege.edu, and then it pulls up Casper's webpage. So it's a little more difficult than that. So the internet and the servers and all that stuff, they don't know www.caspercollege.edu. They know it by an IP address. So here in the example, you have the blue sign, which goes to the website, and then the red, which is describing email. So let's take a look at the blue first. You type in your URL, and it goes through the internet, and it gets registered, and then it goes through a DNS name servers, and then it goes to a web server, and then the computer brings back the home page. But when it does this, when it hits here, the DNS server, what its job is to convert the www.homedepot.com into the correct IP address for that website, and it's just kind of like a translator. And that way, people don't have to remember all the IP addresses. It's much easier to remember like caspercollege.edu or homedepot.com as opposed to an IP address. So that's kind of how that works. And then the mail is similar. So you send your email to email address. It goes through the internet, the DNS servers, and then to the email server, which then the domain owner receives the email sent to the email address. So this is just a simple little chart on DNS and how that works. But the main thing that it does is it translates IP addresses or translates URLs into IP addresses. So that's a big part of this chapter. And once again, same chart here, I guess. So moving on. And then DNS, what is DNS? And it's this is Amazon's version of their DNS, but you can see that it does get a little bit more complicated. So when we look at this is much more simpler than this. But you can see here that the person's typing in their website, and then it's going to go through these different steps to get back to the person that's using it, and then the user can actually see the web server at this point and the web page that they're looking at. So and then it's got several different steps that it goes through, but that's the gist of it. Is it's taking your URL and translating it into the IP address of whatever it is. So the web server for example.com, and this was 192.0.2.44. So it's easier for you to remember www.example.com than it is 192.0.2.44. So that's kind of the purpose of DNS. Okay, so TCP IP protocols and ports. We talked about these a little bit in the past, but working in networking, the function and port number used by a number of common services, as well as many of the typical implemented during the course of a network engineer's career. This article takes a look at the protocols and provides a basic description. So, anyways. File transfer protocol is FTP, and it's going to fall under the TCP at port numbers 2021, and then it gives you the description of the FTP, what it does. So it's commonly used to transfer protocols on the internet, or file transfer protocols on the internet within private networks. So basically you could use FTP to like send a file to somebody at your work or whatever. And then Secure Shell SSH is TCP 22, and it's a primary method used to manage network devices securely at the command level. It's typically used as a secure alternative to Telnet, which does not support secure connection. So this is the secure version of Telnet, basically. And then here's Telnet. And so there's a whole bunch of different protocols that you have to be aware of. And if you plan on taking the Network Plus exam, these are very important. You have to know the full spelled out version. You have to know the abbreviated version. You have to know if it's TCP, UDP, or both. You have to know the port number, and then you have to be able to explain what it is. So those are ports that got touched on in this class chapter this week. And then let's see here. So here's a good chart of what I was telling you earlier, but the Class A, you're going to have Class A, B, and C, and then it tells you the total bits for network ID and host ID, and then what your first occulets could be expected to be, and then the number of ID bits used to identify the class, usable number of network ID bits. So like for Class A, they have 7, and then 14 for B, and 21 for C, and then it shows you the possible number of network IDs here, and then it shows the number of hosts. So if you needed a whole bunch of hosts, then this would probably be your best option. And so Class A, B, and C, and for the exam, you'll have to know the information in this chart, basically, about how many bits and number of networks and number of hosts that you could have. And then here's just I just Googled this, but it shows you like the subnet mask. So if you go with the 255.255.255, you have one address, and if you go with 254, you have two, and then so forth until you get all the way down to where you're going with 0.0.0.0, and then you see how many addresses that is. It's a lot. And then here's your A, B, C, D, E networks, and then private IPv4 addresses and special IPv4. Basically, the local host we talked about, that's kind of how you test your own computer. And then this here, the APRE, is what this is where DNS or DHCP server did not assign the computer an IP address for some reason. Something went wrong. So the computer will make up its own IP address, and they always start with 169. So if you see a machine or a device on the network that has a 169, the DCHP did not work, and that's something that you should look at because that's a problem. Here's your loopback. That's important. Your local link, and let's see here. So those are probably the big ones. The loopback and the local link are, you'll see those again and again and again. Okay, and one of the other things that we talked about in this chapter was the Windows Internet Name Service. And basically, what this does is it's a legacy computer name recognition and resolution service that maps computer NetBIOS names to IP addresses. So let me see here. Give me just a minute. I had it pulled up and it like went away. So okay, so a NetBIOS name, you're going to have a name for the computer, and that's just mostly for the so you can know it, so you're not having to remember like IP addresses. So you give your computer a name basically, and it's much easier to manage that way. So I'm going to show you a couple other things here real quick. Okay, one of the last things to talk about here is the computer name. So this is in your system settings, and if you come over to like rename the PC, then you can put in a name. So when I've done network management at large agencies and corporations or whatever, we would make names that made sense. So, like, here they give an example of the kitchen computer or Mary's computer. I typically wouldn't name it after a person because people come and go, but so like it would be like engineering PC1, engineering PC2, and that way it's in engineering. So when you're doing your inventories and stuff, it makes it a lot easier to find. So that's the NetBIOS name that we were talking about just a little bit ago. And then to see your subnet mask, I did an IP config here, and then I can see my IPv4 um, address. I can see my subnet mask, and I can also see the default gateway. Now, mine's a little bit different because I'm running a VPN from home, and you can see that right here, unknown adapter, local area connection, and let's see. So my default gateway is right here, 192.168.1.1. And Okay, so this right here is for the McAfee VPN, but this is my actual Ethernet uh, connection to my network. But using the VPN gives me more protection and privacy and less tracking and stuff. So but that's how you get that. So I'll just show you here. You do an IP config, and then you can see what your subnet mask and your default gateway and all those things are. So, all right. So I think that's bringing us to a close for today. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow in the live Q&A and kind of get to know everybody and see if you have any problems or questions and make sure everything's going the right way for you. So if you have any questions, make sure you bring them tomorrow at the live Q&A. And if by chance you missed that, I will try to record it and post it. And I think that's about it for this week. All right. Have a great week. And if you need anything, reach out to me. Thanks.